Agora, a nossa próxima apresentação vai ser sobre segurança na transformação digital industrial. Quem vai fazer a apresentação para a gente é o Richard. Essa apresentação vai ser em inglês. Deixa eu já colocar aqui o Richard como o apresentador. Okay, hello Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, that is perfect. Richard, good. First of all, thank you very much for your time and your presence here. Before we start, I'd like to make a small introduction of ourselves to our audience here. I do that in Portuguese, but after that we can start, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, perfect. Ok, pessoal. A gente agora vai bater um papo com o Richard Springer. Ele é o chefe de estratégia e desenvolvimento de cibersegurança industrial da Tripwire. No início de 2019, ele se juntou à equipe de gerenciamento de produtos e segurança cibernética industrial para construir o portfólio de produtos Tripwire Industrial. Em seguida, Richard mudou para sua função atual, aproveitando sua experiência de operações e de engajamento do cliente para conduzir o negócio de cibersegurança na indústria dentro da Tripwire. O Rich também tem experiência no mundo de automação, tendo trabalhado em empresas fornecedoras de software SCADA, em energia eólica e em várias outras funções na indústria de semicondutores e na marinha. Seu principal objetivo é ensinar, construir e empregar soluções de segurança cibernética para nossos clientes industriais. Okay, Richard, I know that you could understand the major part, but
yeah.
I just make an introduction of you, okay? So, again, thank you very much for coming, and you have now the permission for sharing on the screen, and you can start our presentation, okay?
Okay, all right. Well, first of all, thank you, Newton, for bringing me in here, and it's an honor to be here, and for the rest of the audience that I can't see, I hope that the world will change, that we can do this face-to-face at some point in the future. So, all right, well, let me know when you can see my screen.
Okay. Yes, I can see that.
Okay, can you see the cover slide now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Okay. Richard, before we start, let me just make a question for you. With this new situation with the pandemic, it's correct to say that with so many people working remotely, the worries about security and vulnerabilities has increased?
Yes, certainly. As we've all experienced, we are all, moved to home, but industry and business has to continue. So all of a sudden now we've got people who weren't connected that need to be connected. And so you have the technical challenge of just doing that, but then you also have the, what I'll call the, kind of cyber experience about being secure as well. So not only did you have the challenge of just connecting to try to keep your business going, is that you had a lot of new players that are likely probably inexperienced about cybersecurity. So it really is a compounding challenge. And it's something that's affected us all. So absolutely, that's COVID has changed things for a lot, especially in the concerns for cybersecurity. Okay. Good. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. So let's look at the agenda. Do a little bit of an introduction. We'll talk about digital transformation and maybe some of the history and lessons that I've experienced. And then we'll talk about Industry 4.0. And then we'll talk about cybersecurity. And then I'll talk about how we can implement some of those characteristics. And then we'll wrap up and we'll go to some questions. Okay. So first, let's move to our introductions. So I know that there have been several Belden colleagues in the previous days as well. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Belden, but Tripwire is part of Belden. And so back in, as you see here in 2005, is that Belden started to build an industrial IT business. And with that, along the way, they have made some acquisitions and some partnerships to build a larger portfolio of these IT-specific and security-specific items for industrial purposes. And so from left to right between Hirschman, Garrett.com, Tofino, moving on to ProSoft, and then the Tripwire, is that this is the portfolio of products that have been collected in order to provide networking and software security to industrial customers. So Belden cable company, but also building a hardware and software capability in that industrial space as well. And then most notably with Tripwire coming in 2015. So with that, if I focus on Tripwire as a company, Tripwire's been around for a long time, going on almost 25 years. And that was built out of needs for cybersecurity in the IT space. So the business is robust and flourishing. It's built out of the United States, where I live, Portland, Oregon. And so we have a long-lived IT cybersecurity business, which is pretty unique. A lot of cybersecurity businesses are just in their startup phases. So we do have a maturity and stability that's unique in that regard.
Just a question, Richard. As you could see from the last slide, Tripwire was founded around 25 years ago, right? So it means that cybersecurity is not a new subject, at least for the IT world, right? But considering the operational side, can we use the same kind of tools for protection of the side that we use on the IT side?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there are differences, and I'll get into some of those differences, Newton. But fundamentally, the ability to identify what you have, the ability to put security around it and to monitor it, and then to put policies or rules to help identify deviations is fundamental to both IT and OT. How you do that becomes a little more unique in the OT or industrial spaces, and I'll get into that in a second. But yeah, I mean, cyber hygiene, started a while ago. I mean, 25 years is fairly short as far as like industries go, and it's a quickly moving landscape. But the fundamental practices are the same. It just from our experience is that IT has lived it for 25 years, and OT and industrial is just starting on that transition and that journey. So we do have best practices on IT, and then we adapt those for industrial. So getting back to Tripwire, just again, we've a lot of different deployments. We have a lot of global coverage, satisfied customers, and we're in some of the top top companies in the world. And again, IT and OT operations. So
what a kind of I think you're going to show here. What a kind of main aspect that my audience, let's say the organization of my audience are your solution focused on. I mean that specific vertical or a specific subject to be aware of.
Yeah, so I can split that into IT and then into the industrial space. If I talk about IT and the long-lived part of our business, is that Tripwire and the Tripwire Enterprise product are largely known for regulatory and compliance capabilities. And so these are prominent in healthcare with HIPAA requirements, as well as industry as far as payment card or PCI regulations, electrical utilities as far as NERC SIP, cybersecurity requirements. And so compliance and this change in audit validation are what we're known for. And those all have side benefits, again, as far as improved uptime, MTTR, standardizing your processes, automation, efficiencies, and then also when it comes down to evidence and reports, whether it's an internal security policy or you're being regulated, we provide those reports as part of that product. Okay, and then likewise for the industrial piece of it is that we're doing the same, as you mentioned before, Newton, about the kind of IT best practices, is that we're applying the same concepts to the industrial space. and I'll get into that in just a second.
Okay, but talking about, for example, the plant floor, we all know that there is a huge number of different sources of data and different type of devices there, right? How can you use this amount of data from OT devices in order to take to make the system less vulnerable for my plants, for example?
Yeah. So the as far as the industrial aspect of it, there are products that are tailored fit towards the industrial space. So there are specific vulnerabilities to industrial devices, just as there are specific vulnerabilities to OS-based servers. So there are specific libraries, and so vulnerability detection is tailored for industrial. And then also for industrial, the technology that's most widely used is passive identification. So that passive identification is a device that is listening to traffic. It's not scanning, it's listening. And then it performs deep packet inspection. And then it has a whole list of protocols, library of protocols in order to dissect that traffic, in order to identify the devices, provide the IP, the MAC address, and then start to get into specifics of firmware, software, even various card slot information. So it starts to get, like I said, the products are tailored for the industrial environment and looking specifically at protocols and devices themselves. Okay. All right. So let's start getting into industrial. So as I just mentioned previous to this, I was talking largely about Tripwire and its IT capability, but this is Newton's question about how do we get more, how do we become industrial? And so again, that OT device, as you can see here on the left-hand side, are PLCs and HMIs and switches, recognized switches and routers, and then security devices, is that we start to get very specific about these different devices. And so we take that and we use, again, that IT kind of best practice in order to identify key attributes of these devices, and then we put them into what is actionable, as we like to call it in Tripwire, managing to the green. So if you have a pie chart that has some red on it, you have work to do. And then that can be broken down into rules and policies that you've crafted or used from our library, right? So just as a factory takes in raw materials and then produces a finished product, we're doing the same in industrial. We're taking the OT device information as raw data, and then we're massaging it, crafting it, and putting it into rules and so forth in order to identify where we need to make improvements. Okay. Good. Yeah. All right. So I want to step back a little bit and talk about digital transformation in a broad category. And so I just wanted to kind of step back and talk about kind of big data and where we are today. So of course, big data, this was very topical some years ago, that we need more data. And then with that, we created data lakes. And then once we got data lakes, well, now we need analytics in order to distill down all this data. And with that, we've got data miners. And then, of course, with all this data and all the people involved, we've got to bring in the automation, right? So we're bringing our artificial intelligence or machine learning on top of that. And it's just this huge engine that is supposed to take all this information and even the most exotic things that exotic data sets that you thought didn't have any applicability to your process, lo and behold, they do. So conceptually, we were just going to distill all this down, and then it was going to put it into a result that would just revolutionize how we do business. The reality is that we got a tremendous amount of information. We got also a lot of kind of false positives, if you will, or mixed information. And so we're in this continual journey of really bringing in all the data that we can, trying to put the best analytics, and then really finding what is actionable. What's the difference between what's interesting and what's actionable? And at last, this is not going to stop, right? I mean, we went from being fairly narrow in our viewpoint into the data to having the whole world open up to us. and I don't predict that that's going to constrict back down. So we live in this big data world, and how does that affect us? So from an industry 4.0, it's the same concept, right? It's taking in all of the various data sources, inside and outside the factory, if you will, down to the person, down to their devices, and how do we put this all together in order to make things safer, to increase production, increase reliability. So that is, I mean, it's a natural transformation that data gathering and getting smarter about our business is going to happen at the factory floor as well. And so, as an illustration of that, this is actually a picture from our Belgian factory. And how do you apply Industry 4.0? Well, you need information. And so how do you do that to a factory that may be air-gapped or not connected, or is connected via serial connection? Well, you bring in sensors. You start to do the serial to Ethernet conversion, and you start to get unique data that you didn't have before. And lo and behold, you start to analyze that, and you start to gain some benefits. So now that this has been proved out, now the great idea is, well, let's just monitor everything. Let's put sensors on everything. Let's put sensors on the variable frequency drive. Let's put sensors on the robot. Let's put sensors on the door, so that way we know when things are coming in and out. Let's put sensors in the inventory, so we can run a Kanban and what have you. And then, oh yes, and then let's put sensors on our lighting system as well. So sensors and sensors and sensors. And so now that we've done that, like, how do we host all this? Well, we need the cloud. Right? We need the cloud in order to manage these devices, to gather data, and so forth. So I went from a factory that was kind of air-gapped and running an older technology. Now I have this web of sensors, and I'm also connected to the cloud. Okay, so now the information is really flowing, and I'm starting to gain efficiencies as well. So this is proving out to be beneficial. Well, I also have my IT friends, and now that I'm building out a network, and now that I'm connected to the cloud, well, they want to come in here and they want to help us. Right? So they have their own connections. And so where I went from, again, just kind of being isolated on an island, now I've got all these different connections that are going on for the sake of benefit. However, from a cybersecurity standpoint, what I've done is I've introduced all these different vectors. In cybersecurity, but the vectors are a bad thing. This is how the bad people get in. So again, this is where the balance or the realization is that although I may be bringing in efficiencies and gains on the production side, I may be bringing in also greater risk on the cybersecurity side. So this is, again, how things are evolving right now. So let's talk about some of those concerns. The way that I've kind of presented it here is that, as you see in the right-hand side, SANS, it's been around for a long time and very good in training and certifying, and I brought a slide of theirs about threat vectors. And here they surveyed companies about the various vectors. And sorry, one second, oops. Sorry, I keep clicking and it's making a mistake, sorry. There we are. Threat vectors, identifying where the concerns and where the risks come from. And so I adapted this on the left-hand side to talk about various things that I mentioned before. And I'm looking at these variables in what I'll call an equation. So I've just listed them A through H. And again, if our factory was air-gapped, if we were a serial connection, there's a variable A for that risk. But if I connect it to the internet, now I've got this factor B. And again, going down the line of, am I connected to the cloud? Am I connected to IT? Do I have all these sensors in my factory? Are those sensors, do they have low security or high security associated with them? And then what are my threats? Like why does the internet, or why do the players out there want to get into my information? Is it a matter for intellectual property? Is it process information? Are there nation states that are looking at somehow undermining my operations, or are there just generic hackers out there looking to get in because they can? And then lastly, it's about my people. It's about my people in the factory. Are they experienced with cybersecurity? Do they know anything about it? Have they been trained? Are they really effective? And how often are they connected? So the way to look at this is, from a risk calculation, again, is that where I was yesterday is that, again, I was air gapped, I was serial, I had very little risk associated with this. And I look at the factors of, I do have some industrial IoT devices, and I have some concerns about my people, right? So my risk calculation is variable F plus H, pretty simple. What's not simple is where we're going in the future. And here we've got all the factors, and they're compounding, they're multiplicative, and they can vary a lot in this new world of cybersecurity and access and cloud and what have you. So as you can see, we went from a fairly simplistic cyber risk calculation where it was yesterday to now a very complex and more concerning cyber risk. And so, yeah, when you start to invite vectors, you start to invite risk, and then you start to invite, what do we do now? piece of it. So, so this is one way to assess, again, as you transition in the industry 4.0 about what are the other concerns I have besides the benefits of bringing on this type of technology.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah.
Of course, we have a lot of variables involved here, right? But the question that can happen is, okay, how should I start that? I mean, is there any kind of a recipe you should follow? Considering this lot of years of experience, I believe that we already have some frameworks to follow. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's right. And so I'm going to actually go into kind of the next slide, Newton. And this, again, fortunately, our IT friends have already been here. Right? I mean, they have cyber risk, and they've been addressing it for multiple years. And so we get to leverage that experience. And so the first step here really is kind of identifying that risk, as we just talked about. And then secondly, it's really to follow a policy or a control system that is applicable to your situation. And there are many. The one I've shown here are the CIS controls, for cybersecurity controls, the 20 that they identify, and it's very high level, and it starts, at an entry level type of view. There are numerous policies out there, and these are just a few of them, and they start to get very specific, and they start to get very much more intense, and therefore more robust as far as security goes. So some of the common policies in the industrial space are the IEC 62443 at the top, and then the NIST 800 series down below, and then again, some of the NERC utilities here electrical utilities have become, they are regulated, they're audited, and they're fined, and that policy package is very robust. And then likewise, you could look at nuclear power. You can get into other ones like water and wastewater. We start to see oil and gas start to move. And then there's some other policy packages in that payment card industry, and then in the HIPAA or in the medical piece. So Newton, to answer your question, it really is a matter of how to start. I mentioned the CIS controls because I think it's a nice high-level way of starting. And then once you start to build it, you can bring in these other policies and really use it like a patchwork. You can use best practices and these other documented policies and build your own. So that's very advanced. So start with something that's available, take it off the shelf, apply it to your scenario, and then start to build it from there.
Okay. You mentioned the CIS controls, for example, and other frameworks. But if I got it right, there is some tasks here that are normally under IT responsibility. My question is, considering the new IT/OT integration scenario, who will be responsible for taking care of that? IT, OT? How do you see that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually I have a way to kind of illustrate that. And so I'll answer it is that it depends on your scenario, right? I mean, what I show here is the Purdue model. Some of you may be familiar, maybe not, but the Purdue model is a way to divide different levels of your network. It also divides it by the asset type. And when I mean asset type, it also identifies maybe who owns or operates that. So you're right. We're looking at a kind of a factory scenario here, and it's a great question. I mean, who does operate the upper level items? Who operates the PLCs? Not only is it about owning and operating, but it also is like who has the budget to pay for the cybersecurity, right? So there's a lot of questions in there, and some of this is easy. Some of it is, okay, these are the IT assets here at the upper level. This is the enterprise zone. This is looking out onto the internet or to the cloud. This is largely operating system-based servers, and IT has been operating in that area for a long time. What we know from the industrial standpoint, the OT standpoint, is that I've got my factory. I've got my HMIs, I've got the controllers, I've got the actuators, the processors, and sensors, and the factory and the conveyor belts are all operating as they should be. So those two things are pretty easy. What becomes difficult is, what about this other stuff? Right? I mean, I have this DMZ, or I have this level of separation between the IT space and the OT space, but I've also got IT components or stuff, as I call it, in my factory. So it's a balance, right? I mean, and this is where it really goes with collaboration with your IT teams. We're seeing that now. We also see where it's the plant owner taking on all of that responsibility themselves and not wanting IT to come in there. We're also seeing IT teams who want to, or the CISO or the head of, the executive level is forcing IT into the OT space. So it really is a balance, and this is where you will have to talk with your IT friends about that balance. Likewise, one more aspect is, how am I actually digesting this information? And there's two different ways that we do this: actively, which is with agents or agent list capabilities, but they're actively going out and they're scanning, if you will, these servers. And this is largely an IT approach. Down below in the OT space, this is where we employ the passive capability. And again, this is for the sake of not interrupting devices or causing communication traffic bottlenecks. And it's a much more, there's lower risk in that passive technology. But again, if I look in that middle layer, which one do I use? Do I use active or passive, or do I use both? So that's another part of the equation that we need to discuss with IT about which devices we go with the inspection capability. Okay, good. So lots of questions there. Next, so what I've done here, and I just wanted to, I'm using the Tripwire and Belden portfolio just to give a graphic illustration of that same kind of question. And on the left-hand side here are the traditional IT products. I mentioned the Tripwire Enterprise product, and underneath that you can see it has the file integrity monitoring, and then it has configuration management monitoring. And then all the policies and rules are in that blue product, that Tripwire Enterprise. And then we have your traditional vulnerability management in the green, and then we have dashboard analytics in the red. So, and down below are those devices, typical operating system based servers. We've been doing this for a long time. Now on the other side at OT, most recently is we've built out and we've also licensed some products to do those passive scans and put together data specifically to the OT space. And likewise, as you can see the Hirschman piece of it down here, Hirschman is very well known as far as their routers, switches, and firewalls, so providing that network information. So we've also embedded sensors into the Hirschman firewall products. So we're building convenient hardware and software solutions to be employed in the OT space. So again, and then the assets down below being the HMIs and SCADA systems and other devices, is that it's built for that environment. But again, if we go back to our color coding, is that we do have the ability to do both. So we have the capability to address those IT assets, we have the capability to address the OT assets, and then lastly, what we've done are integrations. I mentioned Hirschman and the industrial products and how the sensors are embedded into it. We have the Defino security device. But what we've done is we built the system to integrate that information up into policy and up into the IT space. So we really have bridged the IT-OT gap by giving asset visibility, vulnerability visibility, and then the ability to put policy onto that from the OT space and bring it into the IT space. And so now you have a convenient method of being able to have shared responsibility. So you can maintain control over your OT space, and then where you've created alignment and help from IT, that they can bring in their experiences, their budget, their resources to help us out on the industrial space. Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
That is great. But looking at this picture, I'm seeing here, not all applications have the same characteristics and size, right? So can I deploy some Tripwire solution in different levels? I mean, is that solution scalable?
Yeah, scalability, absolutely. On the IT side, there's tremendous amount of deployments into the thousands, tens of thousands of assets. Likewise, on the right-hand side, I was just speaking with one of our partners, and they're monitoring 190 sites, upwards of a million devices. So that scalability, again, knowing that we need that from our IT experiences, is that scalability is available. And we know it's a driver for solutions as well.
Great.
Okay. Good. All right. So just an illustration here about, again, that kind of deployment. As you can see down below, we're looking at some wellhead oil and gas kind of applicability. The orange items are the industrial-based protocol passive detection. In the middle, we have the Hirschman products. And then likewise, the Defino security device that you can put at an endpoint to be very specific to the communication traffic for that device and add an extra layer of security. And then moving upwards, again, that integration of bringing all that information up into our enterprise system in order to provide that holistic overview and bridge that gap between IT and OT. And likewise, we have an integration with IP360, so we can do active vulnerability scanning down in the industrial space where we have determined that that's appropriate. And then lastly, I will highlight the expert ops piece of it, which is in the upper left-hand side here, is managed services. So Tripwire's had managed services for the IT side, and we are building and about to release a managed service for the industrial space as well. So that that's a whole other part of this Industry 4.0 or cybersecurity, is that there really is a deficit of resources and trained people to be able to operate with these new capabilities. And so we're filling that with that expert ops managed service as well. So what we're doing here, again, is to try to identify what we have, our assets. We're identifying if those assets are vulnerable. It then leads us to how we can better secure it, monitor it, and then that leads us to best practices in recovery. And then again, what do I have the right people to help operate all that? So good. All right, so let's move on. As I was talking about Industry 4.0 and what to be concerned about, I will admit that we're working, that Belden has a project, and part of it as well is that Industry 4.0 is part of our future too. As I said, with big data and everything, it is not going to go away, and we're embracing it, and we're building it with the advantages that we have from our hardware and software. So don't think that I'm discouraging it. I'm actually promoting it. But the one exceptional part here is that what you're doing with Industry 4.0 is built on a good layer, a good foundation of cybersecurity, so that you don't have to catch up with that, and quite honestly, that it doesn't cause problems, and that it's moving along at the same pace that you're adding all your sensors to get more productive. So in summary, we talked about the sensors and the data, but we also talked about the vectors, right? So where we have advantages, let's look at some of those risks as well. Obviously, the benefits here, specific to industrial spaces, is really safety. And we can get into reliability and all the other efficiencies, but we have to be safe. As we've seen in the world, cybersecurity attacks can have safety impacts, and we want to avoid that at all costs. And then we can worry about the productive piece of it as well. That's and also a large piece, but we need to protect our humans first. So third point here, again, do I have a cybersecurity program? Do I have a policy? Are they at the table with the operations folks who are trying to gain efficiency? So let's move together. Again, find a policy to build off of, and then start small and make it expand. This is a journey. This is not a destination. Security will never end, because the people on the other side are continually changing their tactics and their ways of trying to get into our factory or into our corporate offices. So that this landscape will always be changing. And then the fourth part here is start to, once you've got these things in place and you're relatively secure, is that we've always looked at this from production standpoint and what's my risk to production. But what is, now bring in the cyber risk piece of it. Again, if I want to add more sensors, or I'm bringing in more vendors or supply chain or what have you, as the cyber risk is becoming more and more of the higher level conversations about what it is we're going to do. And that's new. So addressing that cyber risk, quantifying cyber risk in order to have that compared to production risk that we know how to quantify is really an advanced stage. But then lastly, it's about improvement, right? So as I do the things above, it has to be a living process. You have to nurture it, you have to grow it, and you have to improve. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, between hiring out companies that come in and try to simulate an attack, and they can tell you where you're vulnerable, penetration testing or pen testing, or you start to develop your own teams that do that. This would be, they call red hat or blue hat, where you actually have internal teams that are battling each other for the sake of building up your security. Are you building an operations center? What is your recovery procedures, and are you running drills? I mean, there's a lot of advanced things that can go on once you get to that improvement phase. So the end goal here is that, again, we're safe, we're cyber secure, we're more productive, and then if you're intimately involved with this, maybe you get a chance to relax a little bit. All of this is very intimidating. You're not alone. It's very early in the industrial piece of it. We have a lot of best practices coming out of IT. We have a lot of resources with IT, so embrace them and build it together. And then we'll get to the point that we'll be able to operate with a relatively low risk. So thank you so much. I will pause here, and I think we're doing fairly well on time. I've got some contacts here for myself.
I have a question here. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, in this digital transformation journey, it's correct to say that not necessarily one solution can fit to another customer, right? You mentioned the need is to build a right foundation for cybersecurity. The question is, can Tripwire and its partner, Boundary Automation, help our customer on find the right solution for their specific application?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, part of our business, your business as well, is that there is a lot of tailor fitting that goes on. And so once you talk holistically about where we are, I mean, my presentation is very high level, but as we start to get into design and architecture conversations, as we get into workflow conversations, and we understand what the customer's priorities are, then we tailor fit the solutions to bring those in immediately. And then we build a journey of bringing in other products to help augment that. So each customer is unique. The approach is, again, fairly high level, and then you become very detail oriented for those solutions.
That is perfect. Okay, good. Richard, I'd like to thank you for your time and participation. We still don't know each other personally, right? But I hope we can do it very soon. Your participation was really important to us. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And please give me my regards for all our team there, okay? Thank you very much.
Very good. All right, well, thank you. And I thank everybody out there for your time. Again, I put Ana Luisa up here as well. So if who's fluent Portuguese, Spanish. So if there's some questions you want to ask with your chosen language, then Anna's available and she's aware as well. So, but please reach out to me. I'd love to engage with you. And then again, like Newton said, we'd love to do this face-to-face sometime. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Okay, we'll see you. Bye-bye.